Welcome to Season 5 of the Retail Tea Break podcast. My name is Melissa Moore, the Retail Advisor, and each week I'll be joined by industry experts, retailers and brands to dispel the myths, share their knowledge and give you an insight into the retail industry. You can listen back to previous episodes on your favourite podcast platform or on YouTube, and while you're there, please subscribe to the podcast so that you get to listen to it first every week. In the meantime, grab that cup of tea, sit back and listen in to Season 5 of the Retail Tea Break podcast. Welcome to the final episode of Season 5 of the Retail Tea Break podcast. My name is Melissa Moore, and today we look back at the previous 11 episodes of Season 5 of the Retail Tea Break podcast. I'm always asked, well, where do I start with the podcast? Especially by those who might have been recommended it or who might have just discovered it, as you do, across social media. This is always the perfect episode to be able to look back, hear who I've spoken to, hear about the topics that we've discussed, and then start at the end and work your way backwards. Well, I opened Season 5 with an absolute bang. I was delighted to be joined by Michelle Grant, Director of Strategy and Insights for Retail and Consumer Goods at Salesforce. This was an incredible conversation. At Salesforce, Michelle blends data and analysis to create thought-provoking content that helps companies understand how new technologies will impact the future of their business. And believe me, with her insights, you can see why that's so true. So in this episode, she talked me through Salesforce's predictions for the holiday season. But having listened to it back yet again, I also feel that a lot of these predictions will see us through to 2024. So she talked about those predictions for the holiday season, which included the kind of uptake in use of predictive AI to drive digital sales. And we can certainly see that happening with key brands out there at the moment. She talked about BOPUS and delivering efficient, convenient shopping and service by buying online and then picking up in store, especially around holiday season when we're all so busy. But when you think of it, your customers might also feel that way at other times of the year. So it's a key one to consider. Michelle explained the importance of having really strong returns policies that speak to the need to your customer, how it impacted the customer journey. And I suppose when I look at it, I won't buy from brands that make it complicated to return goods. It's not worth it. So how many of your customers feel the same? She talked about social media advertising, delivering peak return on investment, both in store and online. And we've certainly seen that ramp up over the last few weeks when we've looked at Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And no doubt that will continue across the holiday season. Michelle introduced me to this idea of resale gifting, something I'd never necessarily come across before. We've spoken so much about sustainability within retail and upcycling and recycling, but Michelle explored this idea that key brands are really utilizing the idea of resale, pre-loved goods or goods that, might have come back through various channels. And it's a great way to consumers to buy brands at a really good price. And then finally, while I had her, I was cheeky enough to ask Michelle, how do retailers and brands keep those shoppers that only appear at Christmas? She had some fascinating answers, so I would highly recommend that you go back, you listen to episode 1 and hear what Michelle had to say. I was joined then in episode 2 by the incredible Thomas Gleason, the co-founder of Store Hero, who alongside his co-founder Carl O'Brien want to empower retailers through their e-commerce and analytics platform, Store Hero, which bridges the gap between marketing and finance. And having grown up watching and supporting his family D2C business, Thomas now helps e-commerce brands grow their business, bridging the gap between marketing and finance. Their mission is to provide store owners with the insights and tools that they need to make informed decisions about their business and, of course, to drive growth. Thomas not only explained about what Store Hero can do, but he started to describe how marketing and finance should be working off the same data. They should be working towards that same common goal. We talked about and explored how free shipping isn't free at all. And of course, what the real cost of the business is, especially at this time of the year. He explored unit economics and also the KPIs that we should be looking at, not just the ones that we like to look at, which, of course, this year, as costs spiral out of control for many brands and retailers, is something that they need to do. And of course, we rounded off that episode by talking about the true cost of doing business. Fascinating episode. Go back, have a listen, connect with Thomas and Carl on LinkedIn, and learn a little more about Store Hero. Episode 3 was really different. I was joined by not one, but 4 incredible guests to talk about buying and merchandising. I was thrilled to be joined by Sarah, Elaine, Neil, and Anna, the co founders of Retailing 100 Consulting. Such a brilliant episode because between them, they've over 100 years' experience across senior levels in buying and merchandising. And with their expertise and knowledge ranging from homeware to gifting to toys, seasonal and beauty, they really did have an incredible amount of insights to offer. This really did dispel the myths about buying and merchandising. And of course, as Neil and team pointed out, not to be confused with visual merchandising. As Neil said, it was more like a planner role. And it's something I certainly took away with me. So, huge insights into the not so glamorous life of being a buyer, how to range plan. But amongst it all, I think the key message to me was the importance of teamwork, collaboration, and communication. Go and follow the guys across LinkedIn. They do amazing work and really insightful and educational with what they share. Episode 4 then of season 5, I got to talk to the incredible Dean McElway all about his new book, E-commerce for CEOs. I was delighted to be joined by Dean because from omnichannel to marketplace, B2B e-commerce and D2C, Dean has had a varied career across so many local, regional and global roles across, both emerging and developed markets. All the experience gave him an incredible insight to be able to write this new book. So we talked about the book, E-commerce for CEOs, what every CEO and C-suite leader should know about e-commerce. And I kind of explained to Dean that I found the book so useful, very easy to read, very well laid out, and so many nuggets of information that I was able to take away with me. So Dean explored the idea of this seismic shift that we've now seen over the last few years in consumer buying behavior. He warned us that e-commerce is not the magic solution to grow a brand or to drive sales, that there is, of course, so much more to it for brands that do it really well. He mentioned the explosion of D2C brands across the market now and actually how that's really changing things up. He talked about measurement and KPIs for e-commerce performance and how useful that can be if, of course, you do it in the right way. And then, of course, he finished that episode by talking to us about, well, what's next in the world of e-commerce? A brilliant episode, a fantastic book. I would urge you, go and get yourself a copy of E-commerce for CEOs. You will learn loads. Episode 5, then, I talked to the incredible Niall Rock, who's Managing Director of Storage Systems Limited, and we talked about the future of retail stock management. So not a glamorous topic, but actually one that is so important to retailers and brands out there right now. Niall is an incredibly experienced businessman whose company provide the backbone to the retail industry. Niall meets the customer at every single touch point he described, from the design through to implementation, and he firmly believes in customer centricity, and you could clearly hear that in this episode. He described how storage solutions are normally an afterthought. Let's be realistic, they are for retailers and brands, and how he and his team can guide them to solutions that ensure retail staff are more customer facing. This was an incredible episode. We touched on the new technology he uses. We touched on the new store fit outs that include the stock at the heart of everything that he does to ensure that your team, your staff, your colleagues do meet that customer. So we talked about bringing the stockroom to the shop floor, the solutions that he can help provide to actually enhance your customer experience. He mentioned the explosion of e-commerce and click and collect over the last few years. And of course, he gave us a few top tips for saving time and delivering on ROI and just sorting out your stock rooms. A brilliant, brilliant episode. Episode 6, then, of season 5 of the Retail Tea Break podcast was a really emotional one. I spoke to Maria Porter, one half of Duffy and Porter, which is an Irish-run family business specialising in personalised gifts. Having started in a very different role in a very different industry, Maria and her husband realised actually they weren't happy and they wanted to do something more meaningful and fulfilling. And so Duffy and Porter was born, first, of course, as an online store, then only more recently this year, actually creating a physical store. And we talk about that growth on the episode. We talk about moving from online to physical, but at the heart of it all, really working on those customer relationships. We talked about the lifetime value of the customer and how that's not 10 years or 15, how it can literally be a lifetime. And of course, Maria finished the episode by giving us some top tips for makers and brands to consider scaling up or branching out. A gorgeous episode indeed, especially in the run up to Christmas. In episode 7, I was absolutely thrilled to be joined by Maeve McLean, the Chief People Officer and Board Executive for Little Island and Northern Ireland. This was an amazing insight into how a global brand is really striving and moving forward to deliver to their people, deliver to their colleagues, and retain them. And we know that's something in retail right now that is so difficult to do. But Maeve is so passionate, she's commercially focused and such an experienced leader. She has this huge expertise in leading and developing a range of teams across operational, technical, and strategic retail topics. And it certainly came across in this episode. She's headed up a number of, industry leading initiatives within the retail sector, many of which we talk about in this episode. She discusses growing the business with Lidl's colleagues by nurturing and upskilling them. And of course, in turn, then that delivers the service and the sale that a business like Lidl really needs. It was an incredible conversation, and I'm very grateful to her for taking the time out because we talked about everything from hiring and retaining staff, which, as I say, is so difficult right now. We talk about the Leadership Academy that Lidl has, which is available to everyone across the group. We talk about those initiatives and the benefits in more detail that support inclusivity. We actually, touch upon the fact that smaller retailers don't have that money that Lidl has, but what can they do? And Maeve's response to this is really interesting. And again, really practical, something that we can all do. We talk about company culture versus company policy, which of course is not an easy thing to do right now. And of course, we talked about what was coming next. And bear in mind, this episode was recorded into the run up to Halloween. There's a fascinating little nugget of data that Maeve drops right at the end. Episode 8, then, of the Retail Tea Break podcast, season 5, I was joined by the amazing Georgina Nelson, the CEO and co-founder of True Rating. A former lawyer, she became fascinated with how to measure, understand, and predict human behavior. And she's built, over the last few years, this rapidly scaling company who recently realized that they had amassed 500 million data shopper insights, an unbelievable amount of shopper data. And we talked through all the various kind of high level insights that she'd taken away from this. It was an absolutely fascinating conversation. As I say, full of incredible insights from 500 million responses. And Georgina took us through some of these key themes. So we looked at the idea that, surprise, surprise, it's your people, your team that really are the power and the driving force behind retailers, especially physical ones nowadays. They make or break that customer experience in store. We talked about the shopper needing that emotional connection and therefore needing to meet a real person with a smile or hello as they walk around. We talk about the realistic need nowadays for tasking on the shop floor for store operations to keep going, but also how that can impact the customer with a lack of focus. And then we finished off this episode by something that I'm hoping maybe in 2024 we can revisit. We talked about retail media. The idea that strong communication in store is actually being seen by our customers, which goes against an awful lot of things that so many of us would have thought in retail over the years. There isn't too much communication. When it's put in the right place, when in-store signage is correct, when our pricing is there, our customers absolutely lap it up. So delighted for True Rating to have reached that 500 million data shopper insights. Thrilled to have had Georgina on the podcast, and maybe, just maybe, we might see her back next year. Episode 9, then, of this current season of the Retail Tea Break podcast saw the coming together of two amazing women. I was so lucky to be joined by two incredible guests to discuss how employee experience, together with customer experience, really does support the growth of incredible brands. Sarah Esler was the digital product lead at Brown Thomas Arnott's, and Natasha Began, principal solution engineer at Salesforce, came together to talk to me all about EX plus CX equaling growth. And then looking through the lens of digital transformation, Natasha explained to me the research that supports the need for retailers to really understand this equation. And of course, Sarah very graciously describes how Brown Thomas Arnott's are utilizing an omni-channel experience to meet the needs of their customers. I was really humbled and really taken aback by the honesty in this episode. Natasha, with her unbelievable insights, the research that she's gathered over the last few years, and she broke it down so brilliantly. And of course, Sarah giving us a real sneak peek behind the scenes of one of Ireland's most loved, most incredible luxurious brands, and talking to us all about their employee experience, but also the exciting news that when we recorded this episode, that their new apps for Brown Thomas and for Arnott's were only weeks old. And she gave us incredible insights into how these were built, with the support and collaboration of all the teams across the board, but also how it was going. So we talked about switching mindsets between EX and CX, omni-channel experiences, which I must say is something that hasn't been talked about on this podcast before. We talked about collaboration and it leading to real centricity. We talked about those fantastic new apps, which if you haven't had a look at, please do. We talked about retail digital transformation and how it has to continue evolving and can never stand still. An amazing episode, two incredible women, and I am so grateful that we got to have that conversation. Episode 10 then of this season, Ciara O'Keefe joined me, the Chief Operating Officer of Peachy Lean, who of course has worked B2B for Nike. It was such a refreshing conversation to have with someone that is so experienced across multi-channels. She gave us a huge insight into working for two amazing brands, one global juggernaut and one incredible up-and-coming Irish brand who are really pushing the boundaries right now. So we talked about customer centricity, especially in this post-COVID era and how it's changing. We explored her B2B experience at Nike and what that looked like. We talked about utilizing the direct-to-consumer route with Peachy Lean right now. And she talked about brand loyalty and how it's so important for a brand like Peachy Lean to really keep driving that, to keep those customers coming back. And of course, then she gave us top tips for brands who were starting to scale their business. Ciara is someone who is so highly thought of in this role. It was incredible to have her on board and so thrilled to be able to pick her brains on such an incredible experience like the one she's had. And then the last episode of the season, just last week, I was delighted to be able to talk to Alvin Narcy. With all his incredible finance experience, Alvin comes from a background of pharmacy across the pond over in Australia and more recently in Europe. And it was wonderful to be able to be joined by a guest who has this retail framework that boils down to implementing the basics. So really focusing on cash flow and profit. Alvin's a business coach who, as I say, has worked his way up from owning pharmacies to now supporting other retail businesses do exactly what he does. And again, such an amazing episode because he is so passionate about what he does. So we talked about the true importance of understanding cash flow. I asked what might seem like a weird question as to what was more important, profitability or revenue. And Alvin's answer might surprise you there. We talked about the fact that discounting really eats profitability and when we should be doing it and when we shouldn't. We had a great conversation about shopper price sensitivity and, of course, how that really has, impacted retailers over the last 2 months. He gave us some recommended KPIs. And, of course, then looking into 2024, he took us through what was coming next for him. So that's a really quick recap of all 11 episodes of season 5 of the Retail Tea Break podcast. And if you've enjoyed it, one little ask for you is please do subscribe, like, and share it on. And that doesn't necessarily mean pushing it on to someone in an email. If you're having a retail conversation, do please mention that podcast. And then remember, you can listen back to all 63 previous episodes of the Retail Tea Break podcast across your favorite platform or, of course, on YouTube. Connect with me, of course, on LinkedIn and follow the Retail Advisor across social media channels. And then a quick reminder that this season, the transcript is available on the retailadvisor.ie as well. So that's all from me. A huge thank you for listening again this season. I'm incredibly grateful, so much so that I will see you back for season 6 of the Retail Tea Break podcast in the spring.